Hey folks, welcome to the podcast. I'm Chris Shea. I'm a solutions architect at AWS, serving customers in the enterprise ad tech and marketing space. This is a podcast dedicated to all things Amazon Q. This is our suite of generative AI services at AWS that's designed to make developers, business users, data visualizers, data scientists' lives a whole lot easier with the power of generative AI. And I'm joined today by the very talented Brooke Jamieson. Brooke is a senior developer advocate here at AWS, and her areas of interest include data science, mathematics, generative AI, and especially recently, Amazon Q. Brooke, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you're a senior developer advocate at AWS.
Yeah.
I really want to learn more about that job because that's probably one of the coolest sounding job titles I've come across at AWS.
Yeah, it's a fake sounding job title, but a real job. And it's really funny. I have to explain it every time I re-enter the country to the border security. And I'm explaining it to someone who does not know anything about tech. So the job title just sounds even more fake than it did before. But essentially, AWS is a really big company that makes products for developers. And developers want AWS to make products that they actually like. However, historically, these two groups are not good at talking to each other at all. So DevRel or developer relations, it's part of developer experience. We're in the middle. So we work with community and developers all over the world to make sure that we're fighting for what they want and we're fighting for the messaging that they want. And we make sure at the end of the day that AWS is making products that developers love.
Absolutely. So that's a brilliant segue into the topic for today's show, Amazon Q Developer.
Yeah.
Brooke, could you tell me a little bit more about what Amazon Q Developer is, who it's for, and how it can help make their life a little easier?
Yeah. Amazon Q Developer, it makes what should be easy, easier, right? So it's had many different taglines as it's changed in how we've talked about it, but it helps you as a developer to be more productive and get things done. Also, if there's something that you don't like as part of development, it gives you all sorts of opportunities to just not have to do that anymore through different agents. Everything from, like, I hate writing unit tests. I've never met someone who's completely and absolutely jazzed to write unit tests. And there's an agent, use the /text function, and it will set up your test for you. Stuff like that that's just like easy and helpful on the go, but also importantly, Amazon Q Developer helps you where you are. So it works in your IDE, also in your AWS console, even in the AWS mobile app, which some people do actually use. It's always shocking to me, as well as now in the CLI, it even helps you there. So it's really across anywhere you're actually working, just helping you to work as a developer and build things that you love. Fantastic.
I think one of the great things about Amazon Q Developer is all of the different methods through which you can use it, right? At a high level, we have agents, we have the chat interface, but I'd love to hear from you all the different ways that users can interact with Q Developer.
Yeah, there's so many. Honestly, we could do a whole podcast probably about this specifically, but so even in your AWS console is the easiest one to start with. Once you've signed in, you can then ask it about your resources. You can ask it about some of your billing. You can ask it to help you solve an error. Just like on the train here, I was trying to upload an MP3 of a video I'm working on so I could put it into S3 to put it into transcribe so I could transcribe the clip. And I went through a tunnel, so my internet dropped out and it said there was an error, but then the button came up immediately for Q to diagnose the error and help me with it. Luckily, I already knew what was going on, but I was really happy to see that Q was there to help me. So even as something like if an S3 upload fails, there's someone there to help. But also then moving through, so you can use it in your app for your console, which I think lots of people do for billing mostly. I'm yet to see someone actually spin up an instance from the phone, but I know lots of people check their billing and you can then ask it questions about your billing as well. You can use it in your command line like we were just talking about. So that used to just be in macOS, but now it's across Linux as well. And you can use it in your IDE. So you can use it in VS Code or Visual Studio Code or JetBrains, or there's new Eclipse for JavaScript that was in preview at reInvent last year as well. So many places to use it. And then even when you go into your IDE, there's the agents you can use. So /dev is what it sounds like. It's one of the feature development agents. Then you've got /doc to help you generate documentation, /transform, which helps you update Java code from Java 11 to 17 in just a few clicks. But there's also one for VMware, one for COBOL, I think, and one for .NET as well. Then this is a test now of like challenge, try to name all the features. There's also the /test function, which helps you generate unit tests. And I think that's all of them in the IDE. But then you can also even highlight code and send it to the prompt. You can do the at workspace one that I was talking about to explain the whole thing to you. Or you can just ask it questions in VS Code. in your IDE. I really recommend this, especially if you have a choice between asking a best practices question between VS Code and your console. Definitely ask it in your IDE. Even things like, what are the best practices for data modeling in DynamoDB? It gives you a really good answer and things like that. Or like it gives you really good suggested questions to follow up from this. So you can get a nice base answer. And then it really helps drive you in the direction of how does this scale? Like how do we work with authentication? All of those pieces that are going to help you get a really well-rounded answer. Even if it's not even like you have no code open in your IDE and you're just asking it questions about building on AWS, it's going to give you helpful answers that even have sources that it links to and helps you show how they fit together. And the command line that is in Linux and Mac OS. And I probably said that before, but I've been awake since 3:30, so who knows?
Goodness, we need some caffeine. Make it the
soon Q Developer will be able to brew my coffee. That would be great.
I think we're not too far away from that.
Yeah, I hope so.
I don't know if we can say that, but
what I think will happen is there'll be an agent that knows I'm starting to make like more typing mistakes than normal. Mm-hmm. And then it just tells me it's time to have a coffee. Like I won't even have to ask it for coffee. This is how good I think we're going to get. It's just going to realize that I'm falling off a cliff.
That's the potential of agentic workflows. Is I think that's the peak of this technology is a Roomba coming out and delivering you a coffee.
Yeah, for sure.
You're currently a senior developer advocate at AWS.
Yeah.
What was that path before that led you to AWS?
Yeah, it was chaotic. I guest lecture at colleges in Australia, and the students always ask me, how do I get this job? And it's very chaotic. I studied pure mathematics. I modeled internationally during and after my mathematics degree. So I was around content and being on sets like this one for a really long time before. I went into startups. I was head of UX and head of analytics at an IoT prop tech startup. Then I was in leadership at an AI and machine learning consultancy firm in Australia. Then alongside all of this, I was in the community. So I was an AWS community builder. I was then an AWS machine learning hero. And then I got this job at AWS and I moved from Australia. They wanted to bring me to the US. They said, pick any city in the US. I picked New York City because I think that's the correct answer if given this choice. And yeah, it's been a wild ride.
You're right. That does sound chaotic, but that's also a wild ride. That's an incredible
chaotic
journey.
Good. Not chaotic good. Evil. So yeah.
That's the good kind of chaotic.
Yeah.
Yeah. No doubt. So what a wild journey that has to be. With all these generative AI tools that are available, with the power of Amazon Q, not just in developer, but elsewhere too. Now we have more resources than ever to very quickly and easily get started with an idea.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that pace at which we can innovate is through the roof.
Yeah. Even like I wrote a blog post last year about how to use it to help you with hackathons. And I went through 10 different ways. And one of them was procrastination. Like if you've spent the entire time eating pizza, which is something that I always end up doing. I'm just like talking to people and not actually building. And then it's oh no, I have to do everything while panicking now. Q Developer can help you. Or even you can ask it features. Like what are some feature ideas that would be good to add to this repo and it's still going to help you. So there's so many different ways to work with it. And then it can be helpful if you're letting it in. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I can imagine too, like when you're speaking on stage at reInvent, there's got to be a lot of prep work that goes into it that can be a lot easier with Amazon Q as well. I don't know if that's been
to you.
No,
this is something I do with demos. Like I make sure I ask it, like, what are the key points a beginner would need to know about this repo? And there's always stuff that I would forget to put in. And then what would happen is I end up like trying to make my screen recording and I try to edit it in later. And then I realized I've missed out a chunk that's important. So I have to go back and redo it. So like these early checks that I do, making sure how things actually work, making sure they're understandable to all audiences, because that's a really challenging part of what I do. But it's the part I also find the most valuable and fulfilling because I love including everyone in what I'm doing. And I don't like gatekeeping or saying like, you're not technical enough to watch this. I love letting people in and letting them learn by watching and being a part of the community. So tools that can help me do that are really valuable.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's a really great role to play in the developer community too.
Yeah, it's an important one because there's so many, like the best thing about AWS is you can do anything on AWS, but the worst thing about AWS is you can do anything on AWS. So it really helps to have people, like there's an incredible team of so many of us all around the world. It really helps to have people who can make that easier for developers because there's lots of like can and should questions with AWS. Like, oh yeah, you can do that, but should you? And this is really where good DevRel shines.
And I imagine as a developer advocate, you see a lot of really interesting use cases for Q Developer. Could you tell me a little bit about what you've seen in your travels in the world of Q?
Yeah, my favorite thing about Q is using it wrong. Just even so there's an at workspace function, and this helps you instead of just looking at, so say for example, if you're using whatever LLM and you just paste in one file that you're working with, The @workspace function looks at your whole repository. So it indexes everything you have in your repo. And then you can ask it questions about that broadly. So you could just say like @workspace, explain my project. That's the easiest one to get started with, and it will explain your project. But I ask it to explain my project to a 12-year-old computer science student, not because I am 12, but because it really helps me to understand from like a junior audience perspective, if I'm making a demo or something, how to explain it to that group. Because there's always different ways when you're working in DevRel, you have to explain to a whole range of people at the same time. Like it has to be accessible to beginners, but still makes sense to really technical people. So I like giving different flavors of my prompts of this with the workspace function to really make sure that I'm covering everything that a beginner would find important. So I'm not missing pieces out. Even asking it like, hey, I want to run a demo of this repo. What do you think are the key points I should hit when showing this? And there'll be stuff, honestly, that I would forget to show until I needed to edit the video together afterwards. So making sure I'm asking this at the start really helps me to stay on track and get something great for the end of what I'm working with. I mean, that's just me, but there's so many people using it wrong for different things. Or now we're seeing like vibe coding with Q in the CLI. There's an enhanced agent. That's quite frankly incredible. I've had so much fun playing with it. But as much as I love seeing people work with Q developer the way we tell people to in blog posts and things like that, I love when people really just run wild with it. And I love that developers are problem solvers. I love that the developers love schemes. And when people combine problem solving and schemes with Q developer, it's so good. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And I think that really highlights, I think, a great point on Q developer, which is it's designed for everybody, not just for junior developers, although I think there's a huge case to be made that, because I think one of the more, I think, difficult truths that a lot of people, I think, struggle to come to terms with when they're first starting out as a developer is in current year, right? Like being a developer isn't easy. There's so many different APIs, libraries, languages, frameworks, and layers of abstraction that you need to wrap your head around initially as you're getting started. It's less like a learning curve and more like a cliff. And I think Q developer can be tremendously helpful for navigating that as well. I'd love to.
And not just for junior developers, but also new managers or managers of a junior team. Because I think what happens in tech and especially in software, people get really senior before they get headcount reporting to them. So I think sometimes because they're honestly just like such good developers, that's why they get promoted. I think they forget what it's like to be a beginner sometimes. So things like Q developer can be really good alongside this. Like I was saying how I was asking it to explain the workspace to me as a 12-year-old, not because I'm 12, I just like a basic description. But also, even if you go through, so when you're using /dev, which is the Amazon Q developer agent for software development, it helps you add features really easily. But you can do /dev, you can describe the features that you want, and then it's going to come back to you with a step-by-step plan. Even if you don't do that actual plan, like if you just use those dot points and you build it yourself, it's still giving you a list of steps to follow in a really robust way. Because I think people, when they become new managers, they forget all the stuff you have to remind junior developers to do. Or they might think, oh, this is really easy. You just do step 4, but they've missed all the other ones as part of this because they're not communicating as thoroughly as they could. So even outside of the development agency part of this, making sure you're giving really thorough communication really helps you to develop as a manager. I always say like bad prompt engineering is like being a bad manager because it just means you're not explaining yourself correctly. So it's all these sorts of things like this that can help you technically to do what you want to do and build what you want to build. But there's so many ways to use it to, improve your management style, improve the way you're onboarding new developers. Like I used to work in consulting and we would get repos that came across our desks and we just had to figure it out. And it was awful because you're just like trying to find what's interesting or trying to use your intuition to, like if you've watched Severance and they do macro data refinement and they sort of just like know what the numbers look like on the screen. If you don't watch Severance, this is not going to make sense to you, but you just know what to pick out for. And when you're looking at a new repo, that's what it feels like if you don't have any tooling to guide you along this. So another use of that workspace function I was talking about is when you get into a fresh repo and you want to understand what's happening before you go to your first stand-up, you can actually do that now and you can do it really easily. So you can start asking it follow-up questions like, how does authentication work with this? Or how does this ETL pipeline work end-to-end? All of those pieces really help you to then go into that stand-up, understand what you're talking about, so you can then do what you actually came to do after that.
And I think that highlights just how useful Q developer is, even if you're not necessarily a developer by trade. Maybe you were in the past, maybe you have a past interest in it. But it's a great segue into a use case that I have for for Q Developer as well. So I'm a solutions architect at AWS, and a lot of my job involves being customer facing, right? So I'm meeting with users of AWS to understand how they can get the most out of our services.
Yeah.
But over the holidays, I recently moved to the Washington, D.C. metro area.
Right.
And as part of that, I live fairly close to the metro, like our version of the subway. And I always thought it would be very useful to have an arrival time sign.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't have to worry about, oh no, am I going to miss my train when I get up in the morning to go to work? So just always, it struck me as something that would be very useful to have. So I found a guide online and was able to basically build my own mini replica metro sign.
Yeah.
And it worked really well. But the problem was, and this is where I wanted to get, maybe more off script from what the guide recommended, is I wanted to put it in a shadow box frame and then it to a wall. Right. And the problem there was it fit perfectly in the frame, but the first and last column of lights in the sign were cut off by the frame. So instead of saying line, it was N. I'm like, okay, so close.
Yeah,
right?
so far.
But so far. So very, very far.
Yeah.
So enter Q Developer. Much like a junior developer who's just inherited a new code base and is trying to wrap their head around what am I even looking at here, right? I was able to get the application code for this metro sign, and I needed some help understanding where exactly I needed to make the necessary changes just to move everything inwards by 2 pixels.
Yeah.
Q Developer was great at helping me through this. It was able to walk me through and highlight the specific function that I needed to edit. It was able to give me step-by-step instructions on how to make the needed changes to modify that code.
Yeah.
And it worked perfectly. It's hung up in my living room right now in my apartment. It looks great. And I couldn't have done it without the help of Q Developer. So maybe not an enterprise use case, but I think it's a great example of how Q Developer can benefit anybody.
I know this example because I also did the same thing because I also am a train person, and I hope a lot of our listeners are. Maybe they'll put a train in the comments. But I love any examples that use subways or trains just because the APIs are normally really good because train people also love APIs. But yeah, also when you're talking about resizing it, if you just told Q Developer /dev remake this, it wouldn't have been good because I was talking about, that's bad prompt engineering because you're not doing a good job of communicating what you want. If you did what I think you did, which is /dev, I can't actually use the edge pixels for this. Can you help me to bring things in? That's an example of a prompt that's going to get you to a better outcome. And if people aren't getting good results with Q Developer, specifically the /dev function, make sure that what you're saying is actually what you mean and make sure you're giving it the best shot of doing well in the same way you would with a junior employee. If you got a new intern and you said, hey, remake this, you could get anything back, but also your instructions literally would have let them do that. Yeah. So make sure if you want to get the most out of it, being specific about what you actually wanted to fix so that it doesn't fix things that you didn't want to change or that it doesn't try to start showing off and doing other things that you didn't need. So just make sure you're being specific, which I guess is what you did for this. I don't know if you remember your prompts, but...
My prompt was fairly straightforward. It was mostly, I don't even know if it was using the /dev agent. It was just, hey, help highlight the function that I need to modify here to move everything in by 2 pixels. And even then it was able to understand that context, even with my limited prompt engineering prowess.
And this as well, I call it block-based development because I'm someone that I studied mathematics and came in the data science pathway to all of this. And so I learned so much coding on my own at 2 a.m. with some tutorials in a dream. And so being able to say, hey, which part of the code actually handles this piece of the logic, that's something that if you're an experienced developer, you can just know and see. But if it's using a different language or you're a beginner, it's really kind of annoying to figure out what you're actually trying to look at to change. So even if you're not using the programming to actually do all of these updates for you, even if you're just getting to fact find and help you find your way around a repo, still an incredibly good use of time.
Absolutely. And I think it's a huge time saver in that front too. And I think that's really the general story of Amazon Q Developer is it's eliminating so much toil from the day-to-day of a developer.
Yeah.
Because again, to your point, I don't think there's a lot of developers that wake up in the morning excited to write README files.
I mean, if they are, please message me. I would love to interview you. If you just love crushing out READMEs for a new repo that may or may not make sense in the first place, please leave a comment, send me a message. I want to hear from you.
We want your story.
Yeah.
We want to know who hurt you.
No, and as well, it's also just starting from a blank page. Even I do like putting work into documentation, but if I'm just starting from a blank page, I end up missing pieces or I end up just not knowing where to start. And as someone, I 100% can be fueled by rage and frustration. So if I see a document even that's bad and then I update it, I'm so much more motivated to fix it. So even when I get a README file that's just maybe sparse because the repo is sparse, it gives me a really good idea of what to update. So a good example of this is anytime you're using a repo that has APIs in there, usually the README it generates using the /doc functionality will give you a few example like calls to show that API working. And sometimes they're exactly what you want and sometimes they're not. And usually at this stage is when I go back and I edit those examples, because then that's how I'm shaping the demo that I'm going to make around this, or I make sure that the demos that are in there really are telling the story that I want to tell. So if you try to work with the MTA, which is the New York City subway APIs, when you start working with them, they'll give you numbers for stops, not names. But if you're just working with them and doing your like quick API test to check everything's actually connected, you're going to see it running, but it's not actually doing what you need it to. So then like at this README stage is when I was like, oh, I need to now make a mapping between the actual word names of the stations, not just the numbers, because no one knows what these mean.
Public transit APIs, personally, special place in my heart for WMATA in DC, WMATA.
Yeah.
They have a wonderful API that made this all possible too. So,
yeah.
Big train guys here.
Yeah, always. No, I like them because it's a really good way of, like, part of my job is I have to show demos to people that are really advanced developers, but I also have to show a demo that makes sense to people who don't know a lot about code, but I still need to show them that it works. So stuff like trains and subways and stuff are really good because people know that that's a complex problem, even if they don't know how APIs work. So that's really easy. Or like I worked on for my Q developer, there's an enhancement to the CLI, so the command line interface, and it's really good. And it's called Q Chat now. You just get started with Q Chat and then you can type in natural language and it will fully develop. It was one-shotting some really great examples. And one of the ones that I did for my demos was I got it to build mazes and then visually solve them. Because then to do this, I was like, build a Python program that builds mazes and solve them. And I wanted it to show me the path and I wanted to show me trying to find the optimal path. And then it colored in the dead ends and things like this. Just because if you understand development, everyone has probably tried to make a maze generator at some point and they've spent like 2 weeks on it and given up because they hated it. Or even if you don't know anything about development, you can still see this happening visually and say like, look, it's got all this logic working. And for this example, yeah, like I said, I gave one prompt and it one-shotted the answer. So it gave me a fully functional and documented Python repo that did this and it solved it for me on screen and showed me. But it's like figuring out ways to make it make sense to lots of audiences at once. So I love train things and I love super visual, like things like mazes, or I made a word search generator once because I had to find like, it was sort of almost a bin packing problem where I had to find the optimal way to put all of the words from a list into a word search. Yeah. Not real development, but it's one of those things if I did all of my demos about how to set up an EC2 instance of your choice, I don't think a lot of people would watch my videos. So it's a nice way of finding like interesting examples that work for the initial reason someone would go in and look at the docs, and then they can go and use it for their actual serious business use cases afterwards.
Of course. I don't know, the white knuckle thrill of deploying an EC2 instance still to this day, I don't think that thrill ever quite leaves you.
Oh yeah, I feel alive. Actually, on this note as well, I made a video a few weeks ago. There's a way in your console now. So if you're it has context awareness inside your console. So if you're on the ECS page, or I think as well in EC2 now, but if you're on the ECS page for sure, you can say like, how do I set up a cluster? And it knows you're on the ECS, so Elastic Container Service page, and it will then step-by-step guide you through what to do and make sure you're clicking this and make sure you're making this setting something, and it can explain different settings to you. And it's so helpful because, yeah, like this white knuckle thrill, I still feel alive every time I do it. And I'm still convinced I'm doing it wrong every time I do it, even though I've done it before. And I think it's so good to have this help right where you are. So I'm not having to switch between tabs. It's right in my console. Yeah.
And you bring up an excellent point with not really needing to leave that flow state, right, while you're developing. And I think another great feature of Q Developer, Inline Chat, is especially useful for that too. You don't even need to leave that particular panel of your IDE now.
Yeah. Yeah. Inline Chat also, even in the console again, you can ask it to debug issues for you now, different errors. You can also ask it questions about different files and things. You can ask it questions about your billing now. All of these things that just like help you where you are. And especially for the CLI for this as well. So there's some developers that love using the IDE and there's others just, they want to live in the command line. I love that for them. But once again, they don't have to leave that to get this experience in their repo.
Exactly. For the command line warriors who might be listening, this is going to be a huge win. I'd love to hear a little bit more too about QDeveloper on the CLI as well. So this supports essentially natural language prompts to generate bash scripts, correct?
Yeah, so we had that previously. So that was launched. It was actually an acquisition that came into AWS. I'm really hoping to be able to interview them again afterwards, but then they've since updated it quite a lot. So in the last couple of weeks, now behind the scenes, it's using Claude Sonnet 3.7, which is a foundation model from Anthropic, and it's using that really good enhanced reasoning behind the scenes. So now it's going to tell you a list of steps it's going to do to take it, and it's going to take that and really run with it and develop it. But my favorite is I always forget whether, like, I have so many virtual machines set up. I never remember if I need to do like Python or Python 3, but it fixed it for me this time, which was really nice. And just picking that up for beginners, because there's so many little hurdles like this for beginners, they would just forget to say, oh, they would like, it wouldn't run when they tried Python and they wouldn't know why. They wouldn't know that they needed to do Python 3, especially this is mostly a Mac OS thing. So it's just picking that up and fixing it for you right away. So in one of my prompts, I got it to build my maze thing, for example. And then I was like, let's run the program as my prompt. So it then tried Python and then to run my program. And then it's like, oh, wait, this isn't working. It's a Mac OS issue. That's fine. We'll try Python 3. And then it also did that itself.
And it's able to identify that on the fly and help you through that issue.
Yeah. And that's just one area it can remediate. But like, I still do that all the time, even though I know that it's like, I know how easy it is to set up a key binding to stop that. And yet here we are. But it's really helpful. And I like that it was catching that error, because there's other errors it can catch as well. This is just the easiest one to remember.
Yeah. And I think what's really powerful about that too is if you're just starting out, sometimes that small slip up at the beginning can be enough to discourage a junior developer to the point where they're like, all right, maybe this isn't for me.
Especially if they're learning on their own. Or like I was learning late at night because I had a day job that I was doing as well. There's so many people that I want people to be able to get help when they need it so they can build what they actually wanted to build. And I want them to be able to, that like move fast and break things. I want them to be able to move fast but not break things. And I think any piece along the way that will not only help them to remediate that error, but also then explain the error so they learn from it, this is going to help them to set up for success in a very long and fruitful career.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear, I know we're working mostly with mazes and metro signs right now too, but I think it's a really great platform to highlight those benefits aren't unique to those use cases, whether you're working on an enterprise system or if you're making mazes in Python or a metro arrival time sign, that time save, that productivity boost, you're going to see that regardless. I do want to focus on the enterprise side of QDeveloper as well. So there's a couple different ways that you can use it. There's, of course, the individual tier for individual developers and builders, but there's also the pro tier.
Yeah. Could
you elaborate a bit more on some of the differences between those two?
Yeah. I'll even like pull up the pricing because this stuff changes so frequently. I forget what it actually includes. I would say as well, so there's the benefits to each individual developer of going to pro tier, but you also, as the other side of this, have the benefits to your overall like IT administration in terms of different guardrails and things you can put on it when you're in the pro tier that you don't get in the free tier. So there's that big place as well. Also from that side of view, you get an analytics dashboard in the pro tier so you can see how people are saving time using QDeveloper. And you've got those customizations that I was talking about. So if you want to access the code customization so it can work really relevantly with all of those inline code recommendations from your internal libraries and APIs and things like that, if you want anything to do with that, that's where the pro tier can help you out. But this is not really necessary for most developers that are going to work on the free tier. So this is why there's two tiers of it. And I think it's something that doesn't make sense to individual developers. They don't understand why a company would need all of these extra pieces, but it's something that really helps you to scale out throughout all of your other DevOps processes and how the company runs culturally.
For sure. And I think to highlight another really valuable feature of the professional tier of QDeveloper as well is that integration with IAM Identity Center, right? So if you have
once again, this is like how big companies work. I think it's like when junior developers start learning AWS, you're like, what do you mean I can't use the root account? This is so confusing. But it's once again, like this is set up for big companies to come in and use. So yeah, like you're saying with IAM. Exactly.
So I'm curious if you've seen at kind of an enterprise scale, right? As a developer advocate, you work with customers that I'm sure are very interested in gleaning these benefits from Amazon QDeveloper.
Yeah.
If you can talk about use cases that you've seen on a more enterprise scale too, of how QDeveloper's been able to help boost development productivity, would love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, I think as part of this, it's one of the features that I forgot to list earlier when I was doing my speed run of listing all the features, and that is /review. So it is what it sounds like. It helps you review your code. And it works across. You can actually, if you go into the docs for QDeveloper, you can look, there's a QDeveloper detector library, and it shows you for every language that's supported, every single thing it checks for. So things like all of your OWASP top 10 for Python, this is in there, all of those individual pieces, like SQL injection is one of these, but there's so many detectors. And these are running across your code base when you're working to make sure you're not adding vulnerabilities in. And this is something that for enterprise is really important, because if people are so used to just like searching for answers and throwing in whatever works, you could end up using like repos or packages or things that you do not want at your company. So it's not a complete security. This does not replace your overall security posturing. However, all of these little checks are great hygiene for your team to have at an enterprise level, and it helps you understand what people are, like it helps each developer to understand and actually review, shocking, it's in the name, what they're building and how they can build it better in future.
Absolutely. And it seems like based on what you're describing too, it's not an outright replacement for code review, but it's helpful for getting code ready for review a lot faster.
Yeah. And then making sure that your code reviews, you can actually do the part that's really important to your company. You know, if you can get these table stakes out of the way and people can self-check that, obviously then you can check someone else's work with the review command as well. But if there's other things that are really important to how your company's working, you can spend time on that. And then as part of code reviews, you can spend more time explaining things. You're not trying to hunt for all of the faults. You can explain and then help explain the fixes for those, which is a much more rich use of time.
Absolutely. And I think that really helps with the overarching problem statement that Amazon QDeveloper solves for as well, which is to remove that undifferentiated heavy lifting.
Undifferentiated heavy lifting is such an Amazon word. Like I make lots of my own AWS merch, and an undifferentiated heavy lifting shirt has been on the list for so long, but like we keep saying it because it is what comes up here and we can't just say the word sludge on stage.
Yeah.
But like,
I think that sums it up better though. It helps with sludge.
Yeah.
Right? So as a developer, you wake up in the morning, oh boy, I get to write 8 million unit tests.
I mean, maybe someone is like this,
right?
But for a lot of people, it's not. And this is especially with how I've seen people use Q in the CLI now. They're just focusing on the bits that like spark joy and bring them the excitement. And I've seen lots of people who were feeling a little bit, not burnt out, but they were just like losing track of that initial spark that they felt when they were really getting started learning programming, like those first few light bulb moments they've had. I've seen people really get back to sort of that like light bulb mindset when they're just building the pieces that they want. And it's helping them to do that in a more robust way. But it's also just like this is the essence of vibe coding, right? Just getting stuck in this thought vortex in your single pane of glass and then getting to the end of it in a way that you couldn't before. So I like that it's making the easy parts easy, but then also if there's pieces that you don't want to be doing, great. There's so many ways that you can get help with those now.
Yep. I love the rich vocabulary being used here to describe it as well. I think it really does help paint a vivid picture of how QDeveloper can help developers of all stages of their career benefit from these productivity benefits as well.
Maybe I'll be allowed to say sludge on stage now.
Hopefully, we'll make the case for sludge.
Fingers crossed.
I would say as we kind of walk through, we understand the problem that QDeveloper solves for. We understand the different ways we can interact with it, right? I think what's really helpful to dive into now is what resources are available for users who are interested in giving QDeveloper a shot. They want to get started, but maybe they don't know where to begin. What would you recommend?
Always start from the docs. I think that's really helpful just because even when I was listing all of the different things that QDeveloper does, if I just say a list to you, it's really confusing. But if you put them in the docs, on the docs page, it's like in your IDE, or if you want to do chat, it's all nested nicely. So it gives you a more logical way of grouping everything together because the service is getting so big now. There's so many pieces. It can be kind of confusing to see what relates to what, but the docs are a great place to start. And then AWS has so many different resources. Like my team in developer experience, we make lots of videos. I make lots of bite-sized content. We also, so that's on the AWS developers Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, or X. And we also have the AWS developers YouTube channel with lots of resources there. One of my colleagues, Nathan Peck, also runs the QDeveloper changelog. So you can see all of the updates that are happening, but there's also the What's New blog. There's the other AWS blogs where they update you in all the ways to use new different things. Also just staying hashtags are really good for this. And you can see what people are building. And I think even outside of the official tutorials and getting started pieces, just staying in touch with what people are actually building is really helpful. And then also like I made it's like a cheat sheet for your commands that you'll need, like your quick commands, things like doc, test, all of those are in there. And then just working out how you can get stuck in and trying it. It's the same way when people ask how to learn Python or something. I'm just like, you should find something that makes you really mad and then you should try and build it and that will motivate you to try it. So the same thing with Q is just find something that you're really excited to try and then get stuck into using it. And that's going to show you different ways to use it, because all of these like the different prompts I'm showing when I'm asking it to explain, like I'm 12, or I got it to explain it in a Valley Girl voice once, which was incredible. And it used emojis. Yeah. But asking these little weird things, that only happens from when you're actually getting stuck in and trying different things and seeing what works. And I think this more playful vibe is really helpful. Just you can try different things. You don't have to commit to them. You can try adding features in different ways, really getting a feel for how you want to work with Q. Because this is the thing, like when we say it's where developers are, that's because you can use it in a huge list of IDEs or your command line or your console, but just figure out where you want to work. And then you can figure out how to get Q to work with you on that. It is really set up that way. So it is where developers are working, not that you must use it this way at this time or else. Yeah.
Yeah. And that flexibility is such a big value add too, because it doesn't really limit you to one specific use case or one specific way of accessing it. And again, with that Valley Girl example, that's fascinating. I don't know how you manage that.
I mean, it's one of those things, like, because it's so broad, it makes it really hard to demo sometimes, or it makes it really hard to explain. But this is because it is in so many different places you want to work. So I think starting with an easy tutorial, there's also a getting started page on the website. There's resources, there's FAQs, just getting started in one of these little guided examples and then just running with it and seeing how far you get.
So if you're an enterprise customer as part of a larger organization that benefits from Identity Center integration and a whole lot more with the Pro tier, what's a way that they can get started with that tier of Q Developer?
I think the pricing page is your best place to start. That's where I always look. I have it open here, but it's going to show you all of the inclusions that are in the Pro tier, that are not in the free tier, all the limits. So different things. So your chat for your project-wide context, you get 50 in the free tier per month, and that's included in your Pro tier. So it's just going to help you to understand what you're working with and how you can build on it. And just looking this, I'm now remembering in the test question that I clearly failed earlier about the different features. It's also talking about Q Developer and SageMaker Canvas, which is included in both free and pro. But this is so good, and I really recommend people try it. It guides you through. You can build a whole machine learning model, and you can chat with it in plain language for once and ask it questions. I'm a data scientist, and I thought the questions it were asking me were really good, and I think it will help guide you. But like I said earlier, figure out where you're working, and then this is going to help you to work where you're working with that. So there's different ways, and the pricing tier is great, not just as a reminder for me, but for everyone about all the features that are included in this.
Yeah. And for the SageMaker Canvas portion, that integration with Q Developer, could you tell me a bit more about what that looks like as an end user, right?
Yeah. So it even helps you to understand what type of data you would need. The example that I did was something about manufacturing, and I was trying to predict the number of faults in manufacturing or something. This will be a test. Like now they'll splice in the video that I made and I'm talking about something completely different. Perfect. It'll look bad. But yeah, I went through and it was asking me about manufacturing, and then I said I wanted to predict this fault. And then it said, okay, you need data that includes this. And it was helping me to figure out every part of it as well as framing it. It even explained what binary classification was to me when it was doing this. All of these pieces that were really helpful. I'm a data person, so I knew this information, but I thought it was really setting people up with great context to make those decisions in future, because that's a really key part. Like any data-driven decision making, you have to have good data to start with, and it has to make sense in context. And it was really setting you up for success with that.
Brilliant. All right. Well, I think we're starting to come down the home stretch of this thing. But is there anything else that you'd like to mention? Any different platforms, projects you're working on that you'd like to highlight on the podcast?
I make a lot of Q Developer content. Shocking. That's also why you invited me here. But definitely stay in touch with the AWS developers' social media pages on a platform of your choice. Most of my content goes there. I actually pretty rarely post on my personal profiles. It all comes through the company. So definitely keep an eye out there. And it's also a really great place to just keep in touch with a developer side of news and updates and how people are building on AWS. Like AWS has a lot of employees and a lot of products, but we also have a lot of customers. And even if you look at how the different social accounts are different, that's going to help you to find the information you actually needed. So if you're a startup, you should follow the AWS Startups account. It's incredible. The team does a great job. And it's really focused on what startups are building and how startups can build better. Same with developers. So it's giving you still information and news about AWS, but for a developer audience. So we can be technical in ways that we wouldn't get away with on the bigger accounts. But it really helps us connect with our community and our audience and keep in touch with what developers are actually building.
Brooke, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for the time. I really do appreciate learning a little bit more with you about Amazon Q Developer.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks so much all of our listeners, viewers, all of the audience for coming along for the ride. I hope they also tell us what they're building with Amazon Q. I know we've talked a lot about some use cases and practical things, but I'd love to hear from our audience as well, because speaking from experience, the audience is normally pretty switched on with this stuff. So tell us what you're building or what you hope to be building in future using Amazon Q.
Absolutely. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Brooke, thank you so much.
Thanks.